This week I have been very fortunate in that I have been able to drive what I think is the most beautiful car on sale in North America right now. This is the 2022 Jaguar F-Type, and this one is the convertible. For 2021, Jaguar gave the F-Type a little bit of a facelift, and for 2022, they really bucked the ongoing trend, and instead of downsizing the engine lineup, they upsized it. The 4-cylinder and the 6-cylinder engines are gone, making this V8 only. The refresh brought a redesigned front-end look. It still looks instantly recognizable as an F-Type and instantly recognizable as a Jaguar. Also instantly recognizable as a cat is my cat Beatrice that seems really interested in this car. Maybe it's a feline thing, I don't know. We have slimmer full LED headlights up front with a very distinctive look to them. This is a 4-module headlight design, which is really kind of cool. No fog lights down below. And the model that I'm driving today is the least expensive V8 version of the convertible with just 444 horsepower under the hood. What do you think, Beatrice? Is this kitty as cute as you? Huh? Do you think this kitty's as cute as you? Yeah. This kitty's a little bit more wild. I have to admit I'm a little surprised that 2022 didn't bring Jaguar's new inline-6 engine into the F-Type, which I think really would have worked with this vehicle since this has classic roadster proportions. Very long hood up front, short little tight body right here because this is only a 2-seat vehicle, and then a tiny little trunk lid in the rear. 2 seats mean that this is technically a little bit different than most forms of the 911, which have teeny tiny little insurance-only back seats. And of course something like the new Mercedes SL, which also technically is a 4-seater. At 176 inches long, this is almost exactly the same length as the Acura NSX. It's about 3 inches shorter than the AMG GT and about 6 inches longer than a BMW Z4, all of which you could consider direct competitors to this F-Type. The 911, the NSX, the F-Type, the AMG GT, they're all excellent vehicles, but they all drive a little bit differently, and they all speak to slightly different customers. You want to take a look at the F-Type if you love the look, if you want a traditional front-engine, rear-wheel drive V8 vehicle with an excellent exhaust note, and again, you don't need 4 seats, you just want 2. There is a particular look that is given to this vehicle by not having that back seat, and a very different driving nature as well, because you'll notice how close the driver's head is to the rear wheels. It really feels like the world is spinning around you when you're turning around a tight winding mountain road in this vehicle, and that is a little bit different if the rear wheels were pushed further back. Say in something like a BMW 2 Series, which has a decently sized back seat, a 4 Series, which has an even bigger back seat, or of course, again, something like a 911, which has a teeny tiny back seat. In my opinion, this is not a right or wrong thing, it's simply a matter of personal preference, and I'd love to know what you think about all that down there in the comment section. The dramatically sloping rear end may be great for looks and great for nostalgia, but it's not exactly great for aerodynamics because it does create a lot of rear end lift, which is exactly why Jaguar gives us this power pop-up spoiler. As with most power spoilers, it is commandable, so if you'd like to drive along with the look of a really sleek Jag, you can turn it off. The design of the F-Type really is a blend of classic and modern design themes. Like these very classic exhaust tips, there are 4 of them, and they really stick out quite far from the body, just as classic Jag exhaust tips used to. But these LED taillights are very modern, very slim, very angry. The sloping rear end is a classic design cue as well. You can really tell if I stand up how low the back end of this F-Type really is. Since this is a convertible, let's take a look at where the power top goes. I will just go ahead and stop it right here about halfway in position. So you can see the advantage of having a soft top rather than a hard top. Not only can this top move faster than a hard top, it doesn't have to open the trunk lid because the top goes entirely in this section between the driver and front passenger seat and the trunk lid itself. Now this does cut down cargo capacity by about 50% versus the coupe, but this moves faster and moves into a more compact location than a hard top would be able to. And because soft tops are lighter than hard tops, you can operate these at higher speeds than the average hard top. Most hard top vehicles, you have to be essentially stopped in order to operate them. Maybe you can crawl along, but basically stopped. This one you can drive along. So if you're at a stoplight or coming up to a stoplight, you can raise or lower the top without having to worry about needing to take off again as long as you go slow on the throttle. Everybody knows a true British sports car should have a steering wheel on the wrong side and a bonnet that opens backwards. We find half that equation in the F-Type. We also find the only engine that I think ever belonged under this hood, a 5-liter supercharged V8. It now offers 2 different power levels, 444 horsepower or 575 horsepower and up to 516 pound-feet of torque. Today I'm driving the less powerful engine with rear-wheel drive. You can also get this with all-wheel drive, and if you opt for the 575 horsepower R version, then all-wheel drive becomes standard in order to help harness all that power and all that torque. Speaking of applying that power, we have pretty chunky tires on all models of F-Type. In this version, we have 295s in the rear, 255 with tires up front, and these are 20-inch wheels all the way around. These particular tires are Pirelli P0 summer tires. Hopefully you'll pardon me for leaving the top up while we start talking about the interior because it has just started to rain again. We have a multi-way power adjustable driver's seat with 4-way adjustable lumbar. The controls are over here on the driver and front passenger's doors. 3-position memory over here for the driver's seat, 3-position memory for the passenger as well, and a power tilt telescopic steering column. While there's a pause in the drizzle, let's take a quick spin around the interior. One thing that taller folks are going to like is that the roofline is a little bit higher than some convertibles. Jaguar uses a fixed-in-place rollover prevention system. We have a fixed-height shoulder belt, what kind of looks like 5-point harness capable front seats, but that's really just a single hole right there in the middle. No neck warmer or anything like that in here. We do have a small storage area right here between the front seats and that little tiny elastic area. You can see we have pretty aggressive bolstering on the front seat back and seat bottom cushions. Moving over to the doors, we have a lot of premium materials going on here. This is what the controls on the front doors look like. You can see we have the 4-way adjustable lumbar, power bottom cushion, and power back, along with memory settings, but no power extending thigh cushion. I do find the cushion pretty right for my height, however. So if you're shorter than I am, you might find it a little bit long. Over here on the passenger side, there's the button for the glove compartment. It's a decently sized glove compartment, and I was able to fit a large tablet computer inside. Lots of stitched materials going on over here on the dashboard and in the center console. We have pop-up air vents here, so if I turn off the climate control system, you'll notice that the air vents descend down there into the center console. It also does that when you park. It gives you a little bit of theater there. We have Jaguar established 1935 right there. And then we have one of Jaguar's older infotainment systems. Rather unfortunately, this system is not as readable in strong light as some of the more modern Jaguar systems, and the software is definitely slow. Fortunately, it has Apple CarPlay, so if you do like CarPlay, I would strongly suggest using it because it's going to make the interface seem a little bit quicker. But running through the rest of the options in here, it does take a bit of time as you're switching from option to option, especially if the car has just recently been started, and you're going to need to use this for certain vehicle functions. For instance, adjusting drive modes, things like that, that's all done in this screen. And you should know that if you prefer the black versus the white look for this software layout, it's going to be even more difficult to read in strong sunlight. Below the touchscreen, we have some physical controls for the climate control system, also toggles down here for things like the auto mode, AC, recirculation, etc. Engine start, stop button, 12-volt power outlet. You'll find the volume knob for the infotainment system right there, a toggle for the drive mode selector, electric parking brake, number of mode buttons back here, auto start, stop, enable, disable, make the exhaust a little bit louder and rumblier. You can raise and lower the rear spoiler with that button, and then there's the button for the top. The shifter is a joystick style shifter, so there's a button on the back that unlocks it. I then pull it back there for drive, push it forward for reverse, and then sport mode is over to the left. We can then push up and down for gear changes. Due to the dimensions of this vehicle, there aren't too many good places to put a smartphone, although I suppose you could put it right back there in that little net area, and that would give you a little bit more access to your dual cup holders right here and the center console where we find the USB input. This storage area in here is just a little bit too small to actually put your smartphone in there while it's connected. The full LCD instrument cluster on the driver's side is much more readable in strong light than the infotainment system. This is controlled in a very similar fashion to other Jaguar and Land Rover vehicles. I can, for instance, adjust the layout here from this dual dial layout to a full map layout that uses the same mapping software as the infotainment system. I can also choose a layout that highlights driver assistance systems or media system interface as well. Moving out from there, we have a round steering wheel. It has paddle shifters on the back. You'll find the controls of that multifunction LCD over here on the left side. These also double as infotainment controls, voice command button, and then the controls for the cruise control over here on the right side. This one does not have adaptive cruise control, it just has the speed limiter feature. That's something that we see in a decent number of Jaguars. There's a big round airbag in the middle, leaping Jaguar logo right there, and sport grips up top. Getting the F-Type out on the road, the first thing you're going to notice is that roaring exhaust note back there. This has an incredible sound to it. It's really obvious that Jaguar decided that even the base version of the F-Type needed to sound incredible, and that is exactly what we get from this. 0 to 60 in this model happened in 4.3 seconds, just a little bit quicker than Jaguar's estimate. And if you don't want to wake the neighbors, you can hit that button right there in the center console for the exhaust, and you can quiet things down just a little bit. So once we go around this corner, you can see that under full throttle acceleration, it still has that same kind of sound, but under more normal acceleration, this isn't going to wake the neighbors. If you'd like to get faster to 60 than this, there is the 575 horsepower version, but honestly, I think this engine is a slightly better fit for the F-Type, just because the F-Type feels really well balanced with this engine, and sometimes the more powerful version can feel like it has a bit too much oomph. When it comes to 60 to 0 stopping distance, even with the wide summer tires we have on this model, it took a little bit longer than I had expected. 112 feet for this version. Some folks complained that the rear end of the F-Type was just a little bit too lively in every situation, and Jaguar has addressed that a little bit with the refresh. They completely redesigned the rear suspension, and this certainly has a more planted feel under harder acceleration, but remember that supercharged engines have a ton of low-end torque. So there are certainly times where if you're not careful, you can get this rear-wheel drive version sideways pretty darn easily. If you're worried about that, there is the all-wheel drive version, and I think that's logically why Jaguar gave us the all-wheel drive option in this, and of course made all-wheel drive standard in the higher horsepower version. It's just going to make it feel a little bit more stable and a little bit more secure. But if you want it to feel lively and you want it to feel fun, this is the kind of vehicle that will go sideways just about at any moment if you want it to. As you'd expect out of a performance car, the suspension in the F-Type is pretty firm. And I will say at this point, if I have accidentally called this an F-Pace at any point, I'm sorry. I think Jaguar should not have named two cars F-Type and F-Pace because they definitely get confused, at least in my head. If they get confused in your head, let me know down there in the comment section below. I am in the firmest suspension mode. If I go ahead and put this in the softest suspension mode, then things definitely calm down a little bit. And this is an excellent highway cruiser. The mission for the F-Type was not to make the most track-capable car from Jaguar, although obviously the former SVR was definitely dedicated to that kind of mission. This one is not. This is designed to be a relaxing weekend cruiser, a luxury vehicle first and foremost, but one with really sporting potential. The difference in the new suspension design versus the old suspension design is definitely noticeable. The previous model felt like it was plotting against you secretly. This does not feel like that anymore. It feels more stable, more planted, and more secure, but I guess depending on what you're doing with it, maybe a little bit less fun. There is, of course, still that very classic roadster feel when you're out on a road like this where it feels like the world is turning around you because I'm practically sitting on the rear axle, but again, it doesn't feel like it's plotting against you. And this has an incredible limit to it. If you're looking for that raw, pure rear-wheel drive feel with a ton of low-end torque, this is going to be one of the best options because of the supercharged engine. If I romp on the throttle, all that torque is available to me practically instantly. There's no turbo lag like you do find in pretty much everything else that this is going to compete with. And it almost goes without saying that because we don't have a turbocharger interacting with the exhaust note, this has a really great epic sound to it. In terms of cabin noise with the lid up, I measured 72.5 decibels. I was surprised that that was as quiet as it was. This is not too far off the coupe, and I think that's simply because of the speed involved. Obviously, if you're going faster, aerodynamics are going to take a bigger play here, and it's going to be a little bit louder inside with the top buffeting a little bit versus a hardtop convertible. But this is a fairly civilized convertible all the way around. Now this model does have heated and ventilated front seats, but it does not have a heated steering wheel, and in weather like this, I would really love a heated steering wheel and of course that neck warmer feature that we are seeing on so many new roadsters and convertibles. Over a week of mixed driving, fuel economy is a little bit better than I had expected, averaging 19.8 miles per gallon over a week. This model is rated for 19 mpg EPA, and depending on the version you'll get an EPA rating of either 18 or 19 miles per gallon. Bottom lining the F-Type out on the road is pretty easy. This is simply the kind of vehicle that puts a smile on your face. It has that truly epic sound. The topless nature of a convertible is always fun. It handles extremely well. The handling might not be quite as precise as the AMG GT. I really, really love the way that AMG model feels out on the road, but it still has a really, really good feel to it. And again, if you prefer something that's a little bit more lively, definitely the classic combination of a big V8 engine under the hood, rear-wheel drive, and a really lively rear end if you start pushing the accelerator pedal a little too hard, this is going to fulfill that need better than pretty much everything else in this segment. This has sort of an English meets American muscle car flair to it. And although yes, the rear end can get a little bit lively in the rain or on slicker surfaces, this is definitely better behaved than the previous version. And of course, we have the convenience of this soft top, which you can raise at up to 30 miles an hour. So I think I'm going to do that now since it has actually started raining here. Let's just go ahead and put the top up. Sadly, the way the camera is mounted, I can't turn on the windshield wipers just yet, but thankfully I am pretty close to home. Although it may sound strange to some, the F-Type is a pretty good deal when you compare it against most of its European competition. It starts at $71,300 and has that supercharged 5-liter V8 under the hood. If you want the drop top, that's going to be $74,500. All-wheel drive in the coupe, $84,700. plus of course the price premium if you want that in the ragtop, and the R is going to start at least at $108,000, and that's going to get you 0 to 60 in under 3.5 seconds and have nearly 600 horsepower under the hood. But the big thing with the F-Type is it is a gorgeous vehicle, and if you're simply shopping for an entry in this segment based on looks, and chances are if you're spending $80,000 to $100,000, looks are pretty darn important, then the F-Type is really a great option. Let's roll through some of the other things you could spend your cash on, however. First up, we have the BMW Z4. This is considerably less expensive, but it's also in many ways less car, I guess you could say. This is one of the few actual roadsters that you can buy in America, though, so in that respect, it is a pretty direct corollary to the F-Type. However, there is no coupe in BMW's lineup. That's because the Z4 was co-developed with Toyota. BMW's engineering, Toyota's cash, created the Supra and the Z4. If you want the hardtop, that's the Toyota version. If you want the ragtop, that's the BMW version. Although some people have been offended about the Supra and the Z4 being basically the same vehicle, developing a two-door, two-seat vehicle is fairly expensive for really limited sales, and that's exactly why we have that tie-up going on. It's also the reason that the Z4 borrows from the rest of BMW's engine family. So 2-liter 4-cylinder engine, 3-liter 6-cylinder turbocharged engine as well. But no M version in this Z4. Apparently, there's just not enough justification to make a special version of the Z4 for the M badge, and they've basically said that's never going to come. So there's never going to be a version of the Z4 that will approach the kind of power and the kind of performance that we find in the top-end version of the F-Type, or something like the new 2022 Mercedes-Benz SL, which is our next entry here. Although it's worth noting that quite oddly, this version of the SL has suddenly sprouted back seats, something that the SL has never had in the United States. Oddly enough, there was one generation of the SL available elsewhere in the world that had 4 seats. That was the R129 version, but that version in the United States never had back seats. Here, it was a 2-door, 2-seat vehicle. Elsewhere, it may have got back seats, but never in the United States. That's different for the new generation of SL, where suddenly it is a 2+2 vehicle. And that means it's not quite the same sort of flavor as a Z4 or a Jaguar F-Type. Also a little bit interesting, we don't know the price tag just yet. Even though tons of people have already driven the SL, it's not on sale quite yet. Rather unfortunately, I have not driven the new SL, but I do hear it is truly magical. I also hear that its price tag is going to be truly high. It's going to probably start over $100,000. Now, initially there was some thought that maybe the SL would be replacing the AMG GT. In Mercedes land, there are Mercedes vehicles, there are Mercedes AMG vehicles, and then there are just AMG vehicles. And our next competitor here is one of those. It's the AMG GT. You'll notice there's no Mercedes in this name. Unlike the SL, which is a Mercedes AMG vehicle, the GT is a little bit more exclusive and definitely more expensive. It also rides on a very unique platform. Now, the rumor mill is telling us that in the next generation of the AMG GT, 2 things. First, we are going to get another one. There was some rumor that perhaps the SL was going to replace the GT. Turns out that's not correct, and Mercedes has recently clarified that and said that no, that there is going to be a next generation version of the GT. But it is probably going to be related to the SL, and I think that's a bit of a bummer because the current generation GT is really unusual. It has the transmission in the back, the engine up front, and it has a pronounced rear weight bias. It's not as pronounced as a 911, but it does mean that 53% of the weight is on the rear, and that leaves it with a very different behavior out on the track or out on the road. It feels very different. It also is more exclusive since it's just that AMG vehicle. But with a base price of $130,700, it is considerably more expensive than the most expensive F-Type. So while some folks out there might be considering maybe a base F-Type as a fun weekend vehicle, that leap to nearly double its price tag may be hard to stomach for some. But if you're already shopping for an F-Type R, then, maybe a GT is not too far away. The main reason the AMG GT exists, and the reason it has the particular weight balance that it has, is because it was designed to compete very directly with the Porsche 911. That has to be our next competitor here. The 911 is a little bit less expensive than the AMG GT, but it is pretty darn expensive. It starts just over $100,000. So the base version is a little bit less expensive than the R version of the F-Type, but not too much. And of course, once you start adding options onto the 911, it's going to be quite a bit more expensive. You can get your 911 way up over $250,000 if you want to. But more than just the price difference, the very nature of the 911 is quite different. It doesn't have that long hood, front engine, rear wheel drive roadster proportion that we have in the F-Type. Instead, it has that very classic Porsche look because it has the engine in the back and, of course, the transmission in the back as well, since it is primarily a rear-wheel drive vehicle, although basically all the 911s these days are all-wheel drive because that leads to better driving dynamics. Driving dynamics are obviously a bit of a personal preference here. I prefer the way the F-Type drives, but I also really appreciate the way the 911 drives. Having that much weight on the rear axle definitely makes it behave differently than a front-heavy vehicle or a front-engined vehicle, even if they're perfectly weight balanced. You'll definitely notice the difference if you push your 911 harder. The steering is going to feel a little bit lighter, a little bit easier to turn in, a little bit more communicative, but 911s definitely can be a little bit trickier to drive at the limit. Now, in reality, the 911 in many ways is not the most direct competitor. The direct competitor from Porsche, I would argue, would be the Cayman and the Boxster, because those are considerably less expensive and much more in the price range of the F-Type. The Cayman starts at $60,500. That is the coupe. The Boxster is the roadster at $62,600. And unlike the 911, these vehicles only have 2 seats. They're also definitely going to be in the price range of even the R version because you can get your Cayman and your Boxster well over $100,000. There are lots of options. Porsche offers a ton of ways you can configure your vehicle, lots of different paint options, interior options, seat options, upholstery options, etc. If you get carried away with all those options, you can definitely get this more than the Jaguar. The way the Cayman and the Boxster drive is definitely different than the F-Type, but also different than the 911 because this is Porsche's mid-engine platform. In these vehicles, although there is definitely some transmission behind the rear axle, which definitely moves weight towards the rear, the engine is in front of the rear axle where the rear seats would normally go in something like a Porsche 911. And that pushes more of the weight towards the front or towards the middle of the vehicle than we find in the 911, giving it a little bit more of a traditional dynamic, but still that lighter front end feel that some people really appreciate, especially if you're doing a lot of track driving. This particular drivetrain design allows Porsche to give the front end more of a traditional Porsche look, which definitely is a matter of personal preference. Personally, I do like that really long hood proportion that we find in the F-Type. Next up, we have Audi, and, well, really Audi doesn't have much of anything to directly compete with the F-Type. On the low end of things, we have the TT and the TTRS. The TTRS is absolutely loads and loads of fun, and it is in the price range of an entry-level F-Type. And then at the upper end of things, we have the Audi R8, which is definitely beyond the F-Type in terms of performance, handling ability, design, etc. The R8 really is sort of like Audi's affordable supercar. Affordable supercar, of course, is a relative term because that R8 is significantly more expensive than the F-Type. Now, the TTRS is bonkers fun, but with a 2.5-liter 5-cylinder engine shoved crossways under the front axle, it's definitely a very different vehicle than the F-Type. Bottom lining the F-Type is pretty easy. If you can live with the out-of-date infotainment system, I think it is a fantastic vehicle. And to be honest, if I were shopping in this segment, the infotainment system is one of the things that I would be willing to forgive in order to get the sexy profile, the engine exhaust note, the engine performance, and the way that the F-Type drives. I know not everybody is a fan of the F-Type dynamics out on the track or out on the road or out on an autocross course, but personally, I like the way that it feels, and I love the way the engine sounds. And yes, the infotainment system can easily get washed out in bright sunlight. The instrument cluster occasionally can as well. But when you're behind the wheel and you're driving it, all of those worries simply wash away, and it is an absolutely fantastic machine. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comments section below. To be honest, one of the prime reasons to buy any of the vehicles in this segment, whether it's an F-Type or a 911 or a Boxster or an R8 or a TTRS, is because of the way it makes you feel while you're driving it and the way it looks to those around you. And I think all of the vehicles in this segment are acceptable alternatives. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comments section below. Be sure and head over to the merch store at aoamerch.com so you can get t-shirts right like the one that I have on now. You can also find me over at facebook.com/alexnautos, Instagram, Twitter, all those other social places. And be sure and check out EV Buyer's Guide. That's our second channel if you haven't already done so. I'll see all of you later.